morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are. I am Nadia Oseguera Ramon, and I am joined by Shania Johnson, my co-host. Hi, Shania. Um, we have two presenters today coming back for part two of a presentation they did previously. But before we get into that, we do want to make some space for giveaway winners and national updates. If you're just joining us for the first time, welcome. Please tell us where you're joining us from in the chat, what organization or city and state you're in. Um, and if you're joining us for the millionth time, say hi in the chat as well. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Shania to take it away for a little bit.
Yes, so we are now going to announce our our grant winners for November. So I'm going to pass it off to Amber to hear who won and who got some monies.
Hi, everyone. I'm super excited because we've got a bunch of, well, more winners than usual today. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Right. Can everyone see my November 2024 prize winners? Awesome. So first up, we have our Community Conversations weekly winners, two winners of $2,500 each. So those are going to Cindy Ashbeck from Lakeshore Humane Society in Wisconsin and Mary Flores from Soul Dog Lodge and Training Center in Arizona. We also have our Maddie's Pet Forum monthly giveaway of $3,000, and that is going to Erin Dames in Roanoke Valley SPCA, which is in Virginia. And finally, for our last prize, we have our 30th anniversary $1,000 Cuddly Prize Pack giveaway. And that is going to Alicia Curley in the Humane Society of Huron Valley in Michigan. So congratulations to all our winners. Do we have anyone on the call? Mary, Alicia, Erin. Oh, I see Erin. Hi, Erin.
Hi, thank you.
Yes, congratulations. Do you want to tell us a little bit about your organization, like your 30-minute elevator speech?
Sure, absolutely. So I'm Erin Doms. I'm the community engagement coordinator at the Roanoke Valley SPCA. So we are a limited intake shelter in Virginia, kind of in that southwestern corner of Virginia. We do dog and cat adoptions, but then we also do quite a bit with pet retention programs as well here. So we are super, super excited to win the grant.
Hey. Congratulations, Erin. Anybody else? I know Mary, we almost always see Mary on the calls. Mary or anyone from Soul Dog on?
I don't see her.
Oh,
Yeah,
bummer. All
working.
right. Well, anyone from Lakeshore or from Humane Society of Huron Valley?
I didn't
All
see
right. Well,
either.
that just proves you don't have to join us in person to win, right? So, congratulations, everyone. Irene's got the links in the chat for the continued giveaways. And thank you so much for all you do.
Thank you, Amber, for those amazing updates. Congratulations to everyone that won. And if you just saw, Irene did post where you can try to get your own grant one with Maddie. So thank you, thank you. Next, we will move into national updates. So if you have any national updates to share, please feel free to unmute yourself or post those updates in the chat. We do ask if you unmute, go ahead and keep it to under 1 minute so we can make space for others and we can make space for our amazing speakers. So if you have any national updates, feel free to unmute.
Hi, everyone. I can jump in. I'm Dr. Sheila Segerson, veterinary behaviorist from Maddie's Fund, letting you all know about our Maddie's Insights this Thursday, December 12th, starting at 12 Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern. Our presenter is going to be Lauren Loney, who's an attorney and independent researcher. And we're excited that she's going to be sharing the results of 3 research projects, and her talk will address the impact of restrictive pet policies and rental housing on pets, animal shelters, and tenants. So join us on Thursday to learn about trends in pet relinquishment due to housing issues and several programmatic tools that may be most useful to mitigate the flow of these pets into animal shelters. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. This is Kristen Petrie from the Community Cats podcast, and I just want to let everybody know that we are in the enrollment period for a college level course that our host, Stacy LeBaron, is teaching. It's called Community Cats Program Management, and it's really for anybody who wants to up their skills. Oh, the host is asking to start my video. I have horrible hair today. I apologize. The course is it's going to start on January 13th. It's on demand, and there's a live Q&A every Friday at 11. It's done in partnership with the University of the Pacific, Bernal College. And again, the instructors are going to be Stacy LeBaron and Elizabeth Finch. What people are going to learn is strategic program planning for TNR and community cat care, navigating funding and resource management, building partnerships with shelters, rescues, and the folks in the public, and best practices for humane and sustainable outcomes. It's great for nonprofit leaders, community advocates, veterinary students, animal welfare professionals, animal control officers, really volunteers who are seeking advanced training. It's pretty much for anybody with a passion for cats. I will put the enrollment link in the chat, and thank you guys for giving me a chance to talk about it.
Thank you for that
Hi,
update.
everyone. Oh, sorry. Can I jump in?
Yep, go ahead.
Thank you. Hi there. I'm Elke Wills. I am now the new director at HAWS, Human Animal Support Services, and I'm excited to be here in that role. Some of you may know me from my past 15 years at San Diego Humane Society, so I'm very glad to be here representing HAWS. And I do have an announcement. We're excited that we just published a field services toolkit. It's actually 11 different toolkits. We worked very closely with some industry partners, including NACA, to put this all together for you all. So I'm going to throw our website in the chat and my email there. So if you have any questions on it, feel free to reach out. Thanks so much.
Thank you, everybody, for those national updates. If you can go ahead and post that info in the chat as well, so people on the call can save that information. I will go ahead and pass it back to Nadia to introduce our wonderful speakers.
Thank you, Shawnee, and thanks everyone for the updates. Congratulations to all of the winners. So I'm very excited to hand it over to our presenters. We are joined today by a dynamic duo from Heart LA, whose work is focused on helping people stay housed in Los Angeles, which, as we know, struggles a lot with prices of housing going up and wages not keeping up. So Zaira Bernal and Diana Cruz are leading the efforts in LA City and some of the surrounding areas. Today, they will be doing a part 2 of a presentation they did previously. So please check out part 1. They also contributed their expertise to Camp Maddie's Pet Inclusive Housing Edition. That will be posted in the chat, so please check that out as well. And if you have any questions throughout the presentation, Zaira and Diana always do provoke a lot of questions, so please drop your questions in the chat. We will do our very best to get through as many as possible, and whatever we don't get to, we will cover at the Pet Forum. So with that, Diana, Zaira, please take it away.
Yay, thank you for that lovely intro. Let me just get my share screen going so we can get started. All right, can we all see what I'm seeing? Yes, I see nods. Well, welcome everybody. Super excited to have y'all here. As Nadia said, this is the part 2 of our presentation. And if you missed part 1, that's okay. We're going to do a little recap. So this is Heart LA's presentation, Power and Pushback, addressing landlord resistance to assistance animal protections. And we wouldn't be a housing justice organization if we didn't acknowledge that we are on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Tongva, Chumash, and Quiche people. We honor their past, present, and future stewardship of this land. As I mentioned, as a housing organization, we are deeply committed to advancing housing justice for all communities, but especially those who have been historically displaced and marginalized. So who are we? Who is Heart? I'll give you all the kind of the quick little spiel that I give people when they come up to our table when we're doing community events. So we are a housing organization. We provide free legal services to people that are experiencing housing insecurity due to their pets. What exactly does that mean? It means a lot of things. Most of what we do, I guess a good chunk of what we do is we help tenants that are having housing issues, maybe because their landlord is saying, hey, that dog you've had for 5 years, you can't have that dog anymore. Or maybe you brought a new dog into the home or a new kit kat into the home. And the landlord's like, you need to pay like $300 a pet. You need pet rent, all of these things, right, that are barriers to housing for people with pets. We intervene, we help the tenant understand what their rights are, but beyond understanding, right, be able to enact them. And we also inform the landlord of what their duties are and try to get them to back off a little bit and just let the tenants live harmoniously with their pets in their homes. So outside of that legal service that we offer, we also advocate for equitable housing rights for marginalized communities. And we do our best to engage in all types of advocacy to increase pet-inclusive housing and just make sure that people are able to have a roof over their heads with their pets. So moving on, here is that recap that I shared. Last time we talked about protections for tenants with disabilities, and a big chunk of that is the Fair Housing Act, right? And what is that? Well, tenants with assistance animals, and I'll dive into that as well. They're both service animals and emotional support animals. So these tenants are protected from discrimination under the Fair Housing Act, which means that landlords have to provide reasonable accommodations for people with disabilities. For people that have assistance animals, that means the landlord can't charge any pet fees, no pet deposits. They can't require you to get pet insurance, a lot of the bigger barriers, right? Because at the end of the day, what we're saying is that, hey, this animal is not just a pet. They're a service animal. They're an emotional support animal. They're providing something for the person to alleviate a symptom or more symptoms of their disabilities. They're also not subject to no pet policies. All right. And like, well, what does that mean? What is that? Well, I'm not going to dive into the whole reasonable accommodation process, but ultimately, so let's say, okay, we are in California, right? Heart LA's in Los Angeles, we're in California. In California, the definition of what a disability is pretty expansive, right? People that live with cancer, that have anxiety, that have depression, those are all considered disabilities. So when we talk to people, we try to make sure that the word disability isn't really taboo, right? Which it can be in some communities. So we do our best to try to break that down and help people get connected with either a medical provider or somebody else that is able to write them the letter to make sure that they have that protection. So what does the tenant have to do? Well, they have to provide that documentation that I just referred to, right? And that documentation has to come from a reliable third party. It doesn't have to be a medical provider. It can be a social worker, a counselor, or if they receive disability benefits of their own, they
Can you
can
just
self-report.
repeat that?
I'm sorry?
I don't know if it froze for everybody, but can you just repeat the last sentence you
Yeah, I'm
were
sorry.
saying?
Of course. So what I was saying about the tenant obligations. So tenants have to provide documentation from a reliable third party, but that doesn't have to be a medical provider. It can be a social worker, a counselor, somebody that knows who you are, and they can vouch for you as a person that has a disability and knows that you benefit from having an assistance animal to alleviate that disability. And I was saying before, people that receive disability benefits, they can self-report, right? Because there's already a letter saying that this person has a disability, they're receiving benefits. So they can make that reasonable accommodation without that additional step of getting somebody else to write it for them. And really quickly, I just want to make the distinction between emotional support animals and service animals. They are all under this umbrella of assistance animals. But emotional support animals don't need any training. They just exist to be cute and love you and provide emotional support to alleviate one or more symptoms of your disability or disabilities. And service animals, on the other hand, the most common example is a seeing eye dog, right? So this is an animal that has been trained to perform a specific task that alleviates a symptom or that, helps you live your life as best as you can. So I will move on from here. Here's today's agenda. We're going to talk about housing providers. Who are they? We'll get into some common methods of resistance when it comes to property owners. Some strategies that we have experienced in our own organization for intervention, and we'll wrap it up with some impacts. Okay, so what do we mean by housing providers, right? We've been throwing that word out a lot. We also do our best to not engage in so much legalese because that can happen. So we just want to break it down and make sure that we're all on the same page. Housing providers are landlords, right? Property owners. I think that's the term that we're most familiar with. But they can also be property management companies, homeowners associations, public housing organizations, hotels, motels, crisis shelters, right? Any entity that is providing a roof over someone's head is considered a housing provider. We've talked about what they are. Now, who are they? So they can be individuals. These are also commonly referred to as mom and pop landlords, right? They, on their own, like their name is on the deeds. There are corporations that are owned by shareholders, limited liability companies, also known as LLCs, that have maybe multiple people owned. There are limited partnerships and trusts, which I won't dive into. But this is more to give some background on like who these property owners are. And with that in mind, of everything that I just shared, I'm going to go on to a little poll. There's a QR code on the screen. I'm also happy to drop a link in the chat. But we just want to see what people think when it comes to these actors. Who do y'all think maybe give some tenants more more issues when it comes to housing? I'll give everyone a moment. See, we're in the chat as well. Okay, and I see those coming in. And yeah, absolutely. As I'm seeing the results come in, I'm seeing some LLCs, one corporation. Overwhelmingly, I'm seeing that's individuals. All right, and let's see what our data has told us. So in our data, and it's kind of like very similar to the graph that we just saw together, right? So individual landlords, mom and pop landlords make up a large percentage of the property owners that we engage with the most. And I need to move my screen off a little bit. Here we go, followed by LLCs, trusts, LPs, corporations. So I think that gives a good background into, at least when it comes to policy and things that we advocate for at Heart LA. There are a lot of laws that are carved out specifically for the smaller mom and pop landlords. And what we like to point out is that, yes, they might not have all of the advantages that a larger corporation might, but there's also a big gap in what their duties are, because the larger corporations likely have management companies, likely have teams of attorneys that keep them up to date on what the laws are and what their duties are. The smaller ones don't. So to the extent that we can advocate for tenants that are experiencing a lot of harassment directly from these smaller landlords, I think we can do our best to highlight those stories and really push for change when it comes to local governments, giving them a lot more leeway. And I will pass it off to my colleague Zaira to jump into some common methods of resistance.
Yes, I want to go over some of the. I think I've been working at Heart for about a year and a half now, and some of the things that I've observed as forms of resistance have I've consolidated into a little bit of a list. And I think that this is just behavior that I've seen from housing providers because of their own implicit biases about having animals in their units, maybe even biases against specific breeds, or even just as a form of harassment against the individual themselves who they're trying to remove from the unit. So in the next slide, we're going to be talking a little bit more about those specific methods. So, written notices with false allegations. What we see most commonly is a tenant or an individual with a disability receive some sort of paperwork in writing that makes false accusations about their either their ownership of their assistance animal or the behavior of their assistance animal, alleging that the dog or the cat is disruptive, is causing property damages, that the individual is not a good owner over their animal and they're not looking after them. Um, that includes like some biases against those breeds that they deem as aggressive. I had a tenant that I spoke to last week who told me that her landlord looked at her pit bull and said, "That's not a house dog, that's a street dog. You need to get rid of that dog." And when that tenant told them that they weren't planning on getting rid of their dog, which was a dog they had rescued, they then asked them to get a shock collar for the dog because they believed that they were barking too much. So we can see how those implicit biases kind of inform how a landlord or a property owner will draft these notices with false allegations. Some of the other tactics that we also see are it kind of hand in hand with that, those false reports to animal control. And this is where the housing provider uses government agencies to build evidence against an individual with an assistance animal. They'll claim that the person is being negligent to the animal. We've had tenants who have cameras documenting how they care for their pets who live in the backyard, but they'll also get animal control letters or letters from animal services saying that there's been reports that they're hurting their dogs in some way, even though those allegations are completely untrue. And though these are not specific threats to their housing, it is dangerous for a tenant because it could build a case against them, regardless of whether those reports are real or not. Another tactic we see are basically excuses. The property owner will say that they are not allowed to have that dog in their home. Usually it's a large breed dog because their insurance doesn't allow it or forbids it, even though that's not valid under the Fair Housing Act. And it's difficult because the tenant has a difficult time proving or challenging these kind of claims. Some other tactics include excessive paperwork demands. So this is where a tenant or an individual presents their documentation as required by the Fair Housing Act. But in return, the housing provider will ask for more paperwork. They'll give them their own forms. They'll ask them to go back to their medical provider to fill out additional paperwork. And that this is just a difficult hurdle for a tenant, especially if they have a barrier to healthcare in general, because those visits can rack up a debt for themselves, or they might not even have like very specific access to that healthcare provider, and it makes it difficult to be able to meet all the demands that are coming in from a property owner. There's also those challenges to third-party providers. Sometimes a tenant will have a letter, not necessarily from a doctor, let's say from a licensed clinical social worker, and they'll present that letter to the landlord. The property owner will take a look at that letter and they'll say, well, this is not written by a doctor. This isn't written by something in their own mind that meets the requirements. And there we see that there's a discrepancy between what the Fair Housing Act says and what they believe is sufficient evidence or proof that a person needs an assistance animal. So that's the issue for them there, because then they'll be asked to go back to a different doctor, or they'll be asked to go get some other documentation from a different person. And again, it's an issue with healthcare access there. And then finally, we have just blanket denials. Sometimes a person will get all their paperwork together. They'll make sure they're complying. They'll have their dog in training or their cat, spayed, neuter. Everything is according to what they need to meet. But the property owner will just say, "Well, we don't allow animals here, so you can't have this this assistance animal in the home." And it's just a difficult situation because it doesn't really follow the Fair Housing Act. So in the next slide, we're going to talk a little bit more about notices. Just because notices are the most common form of tactic for resistance that we do see, I have 3 letters that tenants have submitted to us. And I guess the question here is always like, which one of these is valid? When is there a threat of an eviction? And when is it just harassment from a property owner or a housing provider? One of these things obviously doesn't look like the other, and it's number one. Different from the other two, this one is just a handwritten note. It does throw in language that's scary to a tenant. It says, there's a breach of contract. Your leases legally says no pets. And that's obviously a cause of concern for the tenant, but a notice that does require some sort of action looks more like number 2 or 3. It comes from an attorney, it can come from the property owner or even property management. And depending on where the tenant lives and what kind of municipal codes are in place, there's specific language that's required. But with these notices, it's just very difficult because we're not always dealing with tenants who speak English even. Sometimes these notices are written in English and provided to a tenant whose language is different from that, who is primarily a Spanish speaker or Vietnamese speaker, and they don't know what to do with the paper they were just given because they're not able to understand what's written on it. So that's also something to take into consideration when we're talking to tenants at the shelter level who are coming in with this paperwork and need some sort of guidance or assistance on what to do next. Another question we get a lot is whether notices should be verbal. What if I get a text message that says that I need to remove my support animals or assistance animals? Do those count as notices? And the answer for us is always no. That is not following due process of eviction. And while it is indicative of the power imbalances that exist between a housing provider and the person that really relies on them for that housing, it's not necessarily a step where you need to surrender the animal. In those cases, we usually tell tenants or individuals that they can return back home with their assistance animals. A tenant at that point is in a place where they need support, they need information, and they need the empowerment to know what to do next. But there is no threat of eviction there, and the person can return safely home with their pets. So we specifically work in the intervention space for these kind of situations. We like to deal with those notices that people receive and make sure that we are engaging with property owners and management, that they're educated on what their Fair Housing Act obligations are, and that we are following the interactive process as set out by the Fair Housing Act. So the interactive process is it's basically a mandate under the Fair Housing Act that the individual who has a disability and the property owner or housing provider have a discussion with each other about the need for the support animal in the home and how to be able to keep that animal in the home. So the first step that we usually take when we're talking about emotional support animals or assistance animals is we submit a reasonable accommodation request alongside their ESA letter or other documentation that shows that they have an assistance animal. And that reasonable accommodation request basically asks, like Diana was saying, asks the property owner or housing provider to allow this person with a disability to keep their animal with them. The next step in that process usually is a conversation. So the landlord can't just say, I don't want to accept this support animal. I don't want this animal in my unit. That's not a valid way of interacting in this process. They have to engage with the tenant. In this case, they have to engage with us, and let us know what their barriers for accepting that reasonable accommodation request. They can say things like, no pet policies, and that's not a valid reason to say no to that request. Something that's more along the lines where we have to have a conversation and figure it out really is if they say that there's an undue burden of like an undue financial burden. So in that case, usually it's in reference to they believe that the breed of animal is going to raise their property insurance, and then we can have a conversation about whether there are alternative insurance providers who could help them make sure the costs keep the same. They could also say that the animal is a threat to others. In that case, and we do get those cases where landlords will say, well, the dog bit someone, or they've been aggressive to people and they bark to people. We do engage in assessing that direct threat. So what we want to know is whether the assistance animal is a direct threat, by collecting evidence of what the animal's behavior actually is. And we try to take the bias out of those claims. A lot of times, and as we'll see in some of these later stories with the tenants, a lot of times it's just a pit bull that to a landlord looks scary but isn't really threatening in any way, and a dog that will bark, but they're dogs, so they will bark. What else are they going to do? They can't speak English. Yeah, so in those situations, what we do is, well, here is what the animal actually behaves like. Here are what trainers have said about this dog. Here's what this cat is behaving like. And then we take that evidence back to the landlord or housing provider that's challenging them from staying in the home. And we just, have a conversation and come to terms with the assistance animal staying there as well. Next slide. Yeah. Another thing that we do is we engage with welfare and housing authorities. Sometimes those conversations we're having with landlords, they become a back and forth where we're really facing resistance from them as well. And in that case, we like to bring in other authorities. We like to bring in local housing authorities if we can. We even engage with state departments, since we are talking about people who have disabilities. And we can also always rely on like civil rights departments to file bigger complaints about the individual. Even though those processes are sometimes longer, what we do find is that landlords are a little bit more hesitant to keep acting out, I guess, in those situations, because we have involved a larger agency, and a lot of times they just don't want to have to deal with that, the repercussions from being in those kind of situations. We also want to make sure that the tenant is aware of what their rights are, what the process actually looks like for them. So we collaborate on those educational trainings. We make sure we're supporting those tenants, and we make sure that they understand the housing situation that they're in and what protections they actually have. I think that's the next slide. Do I have one more? Yes, I do. Okay, let's talk about some guys. I have Churro and I have Minnie. So I like to talk about tenant stories just because I do think they illustrate some of the points that we talk about. Like in theory, everything's conceptual until we get to what people are actually going through. So Churro, who's on the left, she's a pity. She is an assistance animal for Destiny, who was living in a foster home with Churro and a roommate. She received a notice saying that while she was out of the unit, a housing inspector had come into the room, and that Churro had barked and had jumped and had made a big show and had scared the housing inspector. And they said that Churro was not was being aggressive and asked that they remove her from the unit. She had already presented an ESA letter. They were already aware that this was an emotional support animal. They were at the point where they were claiming that she was a direct threat to the other people in the space and that they wanted her out of the home, essentially. She contacted Heart LA. She and I had, Destiny and I, not Churro and I, Destiny and I had a conversation about the issues that she was facing. She was a young girl. Some of the other allegations in there included that she wasn't picking up after her dog. That part was true, and she upfront said that she hadn't done the best job at cleaning after Churro. So everything there was kind of like everything kind of falls into place. I had a conversation with Destiny about cleaning up after her dog. I set her up with a partner animal welfare organization who could provide those pet supplies that she needed to make sure she was caring well for Churro. And then I also talked to her and her roommate, who said that um, situation that the landlord had painted wasn't really accurate to what Churro had done. She had barked. She had barked when the person came in, but there was no contact. She hadn't lunged. She'd done what a dog usually does when someone new enters the space, which is, alert the rest of the house that someone else is in their space. So we got in touch with the landlord. We let them know that as they knew if this was a support animal they were dealing with. And then we just spoke about what specific behaviors Churro had exhibited. And we were able to convince the property owners to allow Churro to stay in the home with Destiny. Minnie on the right is Lenny's support animal. And Lenny just lives in a rent-controlled unit in LA, in the city of Los Angeles. Minnie had gone through a big surgery because she had an issue with her leg. As you can see, she had a big old cone. She was very barred from what she could do. Yes, her pink cast is very adorable. I thought she was so cute. And that's the first thing that popped up in my inbox too. I got an email that said I needed help to help Minnie because the story was that the landlord and his wife had been walking down a hallway, and Minnie was walking with Lenny to relieve herself, basically, and that Minnie had jumped on on the landlord's wife and had knocked her over, and it was a big situation. And then I talked to Lenny, and Lenny sends me this picture of this dog and a cone, and I was like, girl, how did that dog do that? I don't think so. So it turned out that Lenny has been living in his unit for over 10 years. He's a long-term tenant. He pays a lot less in rent than the rest of the people in his building do. And this was just one of many tactics that the landlord was pushing up against Lenny to try to get him to move out of the building. So again, this is a direct threat kind of situation where we talked to the landlord. We sent him pictures of what Minnie looked like. And we explained we wanted some sort of evidence. There were cameras outside in the hallways where it would have captured this interaction between Minnie and the landlord's wife if it had happened. And we asked to be able to review that so we could get Minnie in training if necessary. And the landlord was just never able to produce that kind of evidence. And they dropped the rest of it, and Lenny still lives with Minnie. Minnie is all better. Thank y'all for asking about her surgery. We got pictures updated from her when she was doing a lot better, and it was really cute to see. But I think those two really illustrate the kinds of resistance that landlords have against those big breeds, against those small breeds. Sometimes it's about the dog, sometimes it's about the assistance animal, sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's about the tenant, it's about whether the landlord believes they're paying enough rent. Sometimes it's biases about their race. It's biases about where they're coming from, what their sexuality is even. So all of those things play a role in what the individual is facing, what kind of resistance they face. We see people all the time where we just submit a reasonable accommodation request, and sometimes it just gets accepted and it's great. But there are always those cases where people and housing providers just take a little bit more education to getting around to accepting those support animals.
Sorry, I couldn't figure out how to unmute. Yes, I get lost in those dreamy little eyes of both of them. It's really comforting to have them on my screen. So thank you for sharing those stories, Zaira. I'm going to move on now to talk about, well, kind of wrapping it all up, and the stories that we've told, the housing protections, like how does that all come together? Well, I'll give you one example. Early on, when the world was shutting down in 2020, there was a really big concern regarding, people, we didn't know how the virus was spreading, so people had to move in together, and that meant bringing in maybe other relatives, friends, and their pets. It was also because we were sheltering in place, it was like there was a large loneliness epidemic happening too, and so there was a big uptick in people adopting. So when that all came to a close around like late 2023, early 2024, there's a big concern about what's going to happen once the protection lifts. And the protection was in the city of LA, even if a new tenant you brought in isn't on the lease, even if a new pet you brought in wasn't on the lease, you are protected from eviction because of the circumstances, right? Because we had to all move in together. So for the time being, for that period of years, it was a really strong protection because people were having difficulty accessing a medical provider and getting those letters. So this was just a really great blanket. Hey, if you brought your pet in during 2020 to very, very late early 2024, you cannot be evicted for bringing that additional tenant or that additional pet in. The big concern was when that lifts, what's going to happen, right? Are we going to see mass eviction notices for the unauthorized tenants and pets? So there's a really big push from several organizations and ours, and we putting these stories to the front, right? It's like there's already an existing housing crisis. It's bad. How can we compound that by lifting this protection and not adding something else? So we were very fortunate in the city of LA to have had this, right? And it's just an extra question we ask people. When did you bring your furry friend into your home? Was it during this period? If it was, great. Like, yes, an ESA letter, or, if you're a service animal, that's going to help too, because that's a stronger federal protection. But this is also going to help because this is already like written in stone. So that was a really big win that we had, but it took a lot of other agencies and community members to really shine light on this issue and the impending eviction tsunami that could have happened, but we were fortunately able to prevent. And I throw this slide in because I think the culture has definitely changed when it comes to quote unquote pet friendly listings, right? And as we know, when you see pet friendly, well, what does that mean? Pet friendly, like you're letting a pet come in, but they have to be like under 25 pounds and silent and like this, that, the other. Do I have to pay a monthly fee? They're not working. Like they're not bringing any money in, all these things, right? It's like, what is pet-friendly housing? And I think we, generally speaking, in the animal welfare community, we understand that pet inclusive housing is what we are actually advocating for. And as you've seen in the stories that Zaira has shared and some of the things that we encounter when it comes to property owners, this is still really persistent, right? The weight restrictions, the breed restrictions, the fees, and are just huge obstacles for people just trying to enter housing and stay in housing. And I like to wrap this up by always I've said it once and I'll say it again. Attorneys are not the end all be all of housing justice. What it really is, it's community, it's organizing, it's uplifting these stories. Because at the end of the day, people have their own power, right? We can help uplift their own power, right? And this is what the law is, because a lot of the times what it is when we talk to a client, it's and in Spanish, the saying is, oh, yo no quiero causar problemas, right? I don't want to cause problems. And what we say is like, there's already a problem. They're already threatening your housing by making you make an impossible decision. And that's, do you give up your pet or do you give up the roof over your head? Do you want to keep your right arm or your left arm, right? It's this decision that nobody should have to make. So what our goal is to help people really come into their own power, use the law that they have at their disposal, but be able to use it comfortably and with like all the agency that they have, because it's the laws that we do have that exist are meant to protect them. So when we can say, yes, we partner with different organizations, right? We escalate to, let's say, the Civil Rights Department or the Housing Department. But there are always gaps in that process, right? It can take up to 9 months to have a complaint go through with the Civil Rights Department. And meanwhile, what do? Right? So for us, it's like we have to constantly advocate and put pressure on these entities to enforce the law as well. It also makes me think of, we get the question a lot. I'm moving with my pet, and they don't accept like pets. It's a no pet policy. But it's affordable, and I've been looking a long time. I've spent a lot of money on housing applications, right? And what we say, we'll always take a step back and we say, well, the unfortunate thing is that landlords, at least in California, I'm not sure if the laws are different in any other state, but in California, landlords do not have to tell you why they deny your application. So what good is having a law that is anti-discriminatory for people with service animals and ESAs if you don't even know that they are actually discriminating against you, if they don't have to tell you what it is, right? So this is an example of, yes, there are laws in place, but we have to put pressure on them to enforce them and enforce them well. And for us, truly, it is about community engagement. I myself am a former client of Hard LA, and it was Zaira has also been impacted by a housing crisis. Like we are from the communities that we serve. And that is very important because it allows us to connect with our clients kind of in a deeper way, right? When you hear them, and the term is desahogar in Spanish, which is to literally like undrown, where they're sharing this trauma with you, right? And it is traumatic, right? How the being unhoused is, and being in the threat of being unhoused it's a very traumatic experience. So when they're talking to you and they know that you have either experienced this or you're from the community, you know what the problems are, that also helps with the barriers, and it helps build trust. So we truly are all about community engagement and protecting the people that are around us, our neighbors. And it's about uplifting their voices, calling attention to the issues, and making sure that the solutions that we develop are community-led. And that's it for us. Our contact information is up on the screen. I'm sure it'll also be shared on the Maddie's forum. And we're excited to get into questions.
Thank you both so much for sharing so much information in such a short period of time. I truly can always listen to the two of you talk for hours and hours. We did get quite a bit of questions. We will not be able to get through them live. However, please join Zaira and Diana on the PET forum where they will be addressing these questions. As we're closing things up, if you have a 1-minute answer, Zaira or Diana, something that has come up is you obviously are not all over California. You're in Los Angeles. Can you give us a quick response on how folks can find people like you in their communities or steps they can take to start replicating this work in their communities?
Yeah, I mean, as far as, well, the Fair Housing Act applies everywhere, right? It's throughout all of the states. So that's a tool that's definitely available. And finding legal arbitration is hard. Like I went through a bunch of community meetings to even find Hard LA. It was like a month or two of struggling. Yeah, it's definitely difficult to find that legal aid. But I would try to find the legal aid organizations that exist in your communities. While they may not do the niche work that we do, they should have in-depth understanding of what the local housing laws are. So it'd be good to just establish those relationships, build those partnerships to be able to refer people to those organizations. Um, and like I said, you don't necessarily have to be an attorney to do this kind of work either. We can always advocate for people with disabilities. What we're trying to do too is kind of expand the reasonable third party, right? What does that mean? It doesn't have to be a medical professional, like I said. It can be a social worker. It could be, somebody that works really closely, like at an animal shelter with you, that knows you. Maybe they come every week to the pet pantry. Maybe you can, you understand that they have a disability. And so you're not advocating for the pet's behavior or anything. All you're saying in that letter is, I know this person, I know they have a disability, and I know that this animal helps alleviate a symptom of their disability. And I'll pass it off to you, Zaira, if you have any other thoughts.
I would just add that tenants unions are also incredibly powerful. Like Diana was saying, a lot of tenants are just scared. They're reasonably scared, and they need some sort of support so that they're able to have that kind of empowerment so that they can exercise their rights. They know that they have rights at some points, and then they sometimes are just afraid of retaliation, afraid of what the landlord might do if they exercise their rights. And so tenant unions are really helpful because they get them connected to other tenants who are going through the same thing, who have a collective power because they're able to join in together and understand what kind of rights they have. And that is also really helpful in helping them come into their own power and exercise the rights that they've been given.
Yeah. Yeah, I love they bank on folks being afraid. So I love that your focus is community care, empowering folks. So thank you again so much for being here. Just want to let folks know that next week we are going to keep the theme going of community care and mutual aid. We will be joined by two presenters who will be talking about pet food pantries. So everything is connected. Yeah, so thank you, Diana, Zaira, everybody for being here. Take care, and we will see you next Monday. Bye.